So my name is Féidhlim Harty. I'm here in Skerries at the Skerries Eco Festival. What I've been talking today about is stormwater and stormwater management. And there's a number of distinct elements to it. And one is that we want to catch the water as it falls and lands on the street surfaces and hold on to that to ease up flooding, to ease up droughts, that type of thing. But also there's the filtration element. We want to get the water as clean as possible as it moves from the streetscapes into the rivers and streams. And the other is biodiversity and also climate. And by putting in stormwater wetlands, stormwater ponds, we can deal with all of those things and begin to improve the environment on multiple different levels, really, all by holding on to stormwater as it flows, filtering it, improving the quality, storing it so that we don't get our flooding and our drought cycle, and generally making the streetscape a greener and happier place for pollinators while filtering the water and moving it on into the wider environment. Is that when there's heavy rainfall, there's lots of runoff. It brings pollution, whether it's just fines from the gravel, whether it's hydrocarbons, litter, about high. And so here, our water quality is showing up as bad. So the mill stream is showing up as bad on the EPA mapping tool. So this is a mapping tool that you can look at online, catchments.ie, zoom in, look at your own local stream, turn on and off the different layers to see what's the water quality, what's the risk of not meeting our water framework directive targets, etc. Ideally, to deal with flooding in Skerries, we would deal with the whole catchment. And that's actually mostly up here. So this is where we should be focusing our attention if what we want to deal with is the village of Skerries and the flood prevention within the village of Skerries. And an ideal place to do it would be just here, above the railway line, which is at the bottom of both of the branches of the stream, but still outside of the very expensive land within the urban areas. So I just put that there in context. So when we look at a map of the country, this is the same mapping tool, it's the EPA catchments.ie. When we look at this, what we see is that the blue dots denote high quality water, and they tend to be on the higher ground around the country. What that tells us is that where you've got people and cattle in high numbers, you tend to have poor water quality. Now, we've had people and cattle for a long time, so I would argue it's what we're doing rather than the fact that there's people or cattle per se. There was a farmer on a talk I was giving on Thursday, and she said, it's not the cow, it's the how. That's the issue with it. But it does show us that there's a problem. You know, as soon as there's 70 tanks or 30 tanks or whatever, there is a problem. And there are loads of things that we can do with that, and I'm going to focus just on stormwater today. So, urban soils, these are sustainable drainage systems or sustained urban drainage systems. And the ones that I particularly like, can everybody actually see the writing on that? Okay? Yeah. The ones I particularly like are the ones in green, because those are either planted, so they offer wildlife benefit as well, or in the case of rain harvesting, they've got an ancillary benefit. And so about 8% of global energy use goes into treating water, delivering water, getting rid of it again, treating it again, and just the whole water infrastructure has an enormous carbon footprint. So rainwater harvesting can have a disproportionate benefit on climate change, as well as just holding on to water. I mean, you know, nicer water to water your vegetables than you would drink yourself if you're drinking chlorinated, fluorinated, etc., water. So green roofs are, you know, your source control technique. Where would we start? A green roof is one way to do that. And last year when we were walking around, in fact probably more recently last year, we were walking around and just looking at a tile roof over at the other side of Skerries, and I was looking up the mosses on the roof thinking, great, just leave it alone, you know, let it do its thing. It was a derelict building, and just leaving the mosses there, you know, so that when the rain falls, it's got somewhere, just a little pause between landing and running off. You know, just slow down on the old cleaning thing. Do you know, it's overrated, it really is. So that's one, the rain harvesting I mentioned, as well as holding on to water. What rain harvesting will do is just store rainwater briefly that you can then use during drier periods. And so it flattens the curve. You know, with storms, you've got this spike, and what you want to do is spread that out over a much longer period of time. So in terms of filters and trenches, bioretention areas are basically big rain gardens. They're slightly more fancy, slightly more engineered. A rain garden is, for all intents and purposes, a hole in the ground close to your downpipe with a couple of plants thrown in. That's a kind of a rudimentary basis. I'll be showing you a couple of photographs. A bioretention area is slightly more structured than that, slightly more engineered, got deeper soil, that kind of stuff. But basically it's a hole in the ground that's been planted and slightly engineered. The idea being that when there's heavy rainfall, that will flow into your basin or your area and slowly soak into the soil underneath. Swales are another one. These are long trenches within the ground, not permaculture swales, which are slightly different. We're looking here at engineering swales, so wet swales or dry swales, depending on how high the water table is really, or how much soakage there is in the soil. They're basically long, relatively wide, relatively shallow channels that filter rainwater as it flows down through them and provide habitat, encouraging the water to soak into the soil and encouraging it to just slow down between A and B. So they're a really, really good way to move water from A to B in a way that's eco-friendly. And stormwater wetlands then, as the name suggests, it's a big basin area that you root your gutters into, provides the storage for the water, filtration occurs before the water comes out the other end into the river or the stream. And then basins and stores, similar infiltration basins. As the name suggests, I mean, every park, as the name suggests, it's a basin that allows infiltration into the ground underneath. Every park in the country should have, the football area in the park and the dog running area, and all of those areas should be below flood level. Because so that there's space for the water to settle. Because what we've done is we've mounded everything up. And of course there's flooding, because there's nowhere for the water to sit. The poor old water was just doing its thing. And suddenly all this ground is built up around it. So when the rivers break their banks, they suddenly find that it's way into shop fronts and living rooms where it's made really unwelcome. And so providing space to welcome that flood water, and the cheapest places to flood are parks and playing fields and that type of environment. If you look at that map of Middleton, I change it back for just a couple of maps. One of the things you notice with this is that actually the playing fields and the park and the homes they're all sitting high and dry, they're well above the level of the doctor's surgery and all of the shop fronts and everything. And so by redesigning our spaces, we could just make it nicer for water generally. And stormwater ponds, as the name suggests, are ponds that take stormwater. So, without further ado, I want to say these are storm drains coming into a drain from a housing estate in Middleton. As soon as you take water out of pipes, things start to get interesting. Suddenly there's space for the silt to settle, for the grit to settle out, for plants to begin to encroach. The plants will mop up nutrients. They'll also, just by pure physical filtration, slow down the flow of the water. So all sorts of magic begins to happen once you just take away the pipes. So if you think of any technology that we have, and I'm about to make a really generalized statement, but feel free to discard again afterwards. Basically, think of any technology that we employ. If you can just get rid of the technology, very often things improve. Okay, and that's, I'm sure there are lots of exceptions, but I just let it stand there anyway because I've got the floor and I'm moving really quickly. So one easy thing that we can do, we could just build small little dams along the roadside. By the afternoon we ended up with these pocket pools down along the side of the road, and that just intercepts the drain, filters the water, which actually wasn't all that clean, and filters it as it's working its way down towards the stream. And so just little things like that can make such a difference to the stream itself, both the pollution levels and also to the hydraulics of it. Slowing down the flow and reducing flooding and reducing droughts. This is the new rain garden in Geishel in County Offaly. This is a community car park, and we've basically blocked the old outlet pipe from here because we wanted water to feed our pond, the new community pond. So we blocked the gully. We routed a pipe out through onto the lawn, dropped the level of the lawn by about 1.5 feet to make a tiny little open swale. The water goes from the swale into this gravel rain garden area, so stop touching the screen, and then it flows over from the stream through this pipe into the community pond. So it's a lovely way to produce, to provide habitat, and to have a backup water supply from the car park, but to filter that water as it comes through. So the swale traps the silt, which protects the rain garden, which pulls up the nutrients, which protects the pond. So there's a nice chain of events that's going on there. Simple things like a rain planter, that's something that can be done. So for preference, the water goes into our water butt, and then when the water is full, it continues down into this raised planter. That then goes down into the gravel. There's a drain there which brings it around actually into another rain garden down at the bottom of the garden. So it doesn't look like much, but if every house, if every downpipe in Skerries that feeds into the combined sewer had one of these, you might reduce the amount of storm surge overflows by, I don't know, I'm going to guess at 10%. I don't know. So that's 10% less incidences where the sea, just off the coast, is having raw sewage dumped directly into it simply because of excess rainfall. Okay? Oh, the other one is in South Dublin. It's just if you don't have space for a planter, just putting in a tiny little infiltration area underneath the lawn is one thing that can be done as well. Okay, so you might recognise that number 8, everybody drives that car, that was taken last year. So this is, let me see, this is a photograph at the, I think it's a community centre, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so there's a small little triangle. The lines here denote that what I'm suggesting is that you drop the ground level there by about 1.5 foot, maybe 2 foot, something like that. Backfill that area with wood chips, soil, gravel or sand or something like that. Put a new curbing around it so that the water that's flowing down into that area gets filtered before it gets into the curb. So the curb standpipe, so the curbing standpipe, so there's a standpipe on that to allow the whole thing to fill up and then spill into the gutter, as it did before. Some of the water will soak into the groundwater. In higher storm events, it won't flood the area, it'll still get into the pipe, but you're just slowing down the time that it takes to get into the pipe. This is an example of what we've done in Westmeath. This was simply a raised planter, and all we did was we inverted the shape. You know, we just dug it out. We did dig over the area, we put in wood chips and that kind of stuff as well, and planted it up. And Ballynahown actually just recently won the Anton Floral, where they were showing off all sorts of rain garden type things that they were doing. So that was quite exciting. So there's guidelines from Dublin City Council and from the UK, just giving guidance on rainwater planters and on rain gardens themselves. So those guidelines do exist.
Link to on sustainableskerries.com/water.
Okay, so they're there to download.
They're all there.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Ready to download them, yeah.
Thank you. So again, we're going to have our raised planters. We can do a similar thing within the lawn, just by digging out a bit of a pool. Similarly within curb areas, there's lots of designs that we can cater for those. This is an example of a stormwater pond in Moycullen. This is the reed bed system for the sewage. So the rainwater landing on the streets in Moycullen in Galway is routed down to the stormwater pond and then into the canal that feeds into the curb. So really, really straightforward technologies that are great for wildlife. This is the one in UL in Limerick, and probably in County Clare because it's just at our side of the river. But anyway, in Limerick City. And again, this is a habitat pond that we did as part of the Cork Main Drainage Project about 15 years back in Cork City. I just want to say a brief note on safety. Safety is obviously important. The drowning risk exists. So this is my mum and my 2 girls from years back. And there's no fence between the new wetland area and the playground. And sometimes that bothers people a little bit. One of the things that you can do there is keep the ground level really gentle. That's really good for wildlife and really good for safety. There's no fence between the playground and Cork Harbour either, but people don't seem to worry too much about that. You know, for some strange reason, you can have the sea 50 yards away and not be allowed to put in a pond. You know, it's just a mindset thing, but I don't want to understate the risks that do exist and the care that needs to be taken. And we can do it on a big scale as well. This is a big habitat wetland area, it's 60 acres, just north of the River Shannon at the tunnel. And so this was a wildlife design that we put in with wetlands, ponds, pools, woodlands, grasslands. And again, it just shows that things are, you know, the potentials are there, there's examples there. We just need to roll it out everywhere. You know, what's needed is to have lots and lots of this going on. The reason why I'm bringing habitat ponds in as well, it's not just the flooding and the drought that we're looking at the moment. There's the water quality issues are another, climate issues are another. One of the reasons why we have the climate change symptoms that we have is because of how we manage water. If you do all of the things that follow the standard engineering guidelines in terms of getting rid of water as quickly as possible, flooding is an inevitability. You don't need carbon to get involved. Droughts are an inevitability. We're doing the same thing with farmland. We're treating farmland in a way that really encourages droughts and encourages flooding. And so we can shift that and we can alleviate the symptoms of climate change without ever looking at carbon, because it gets really depressing to try to look at carbon, because the whole industry around carbon extraction is so vast that actually personally I'd much rather be playing with ponds, which are, I would argue, equally or more effective, and they sequester huge amounts of carbon. So there's lots of ways of looking at this. And the other is biodiversity. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on the planet at the moment, so that's unrolling as we speak. The future trajectories are really, really serious. So I would much rather pick them up and throw them out the window and say, I'm not interested in the trajectories. I don't want to know how susceptible I am to cancer. I want to hear about the 1% of the people with my condition that survive. That's all I'm interested in, and to look for that. And so by introducing spaces like this, we suddenly create space for wildlife. I was listening to Isabella Tree of Knepp Castle Estate talking about how they got turtle doves back in their wilding project in just outside London. And I was asked to do a talk on waterway rewilding a number of years back. And so I asked one of the local county council people who was an avid bird watcher in Limerick for a species list. And I got the species list for this wetland that we created, and turtle doves were in there. Did I mention that Isabella Tree was talking about turtle doves? I did? Good, okay. I'm tripping ahead of myself as I try to get out into my walk. So I was just really impressed at that, because I don't do enough of the ecological follow-up. I'm not an ecologist, but just seeing those examples come through is just amazing. It's just really exciting to watch. So here we are, give or take. Correct me if I'm wrong, Helen, I think this might be the last slide. We're going to walk out and around, back along and back towards the community centre. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll look for the opportunities. We'll look and see where are the areas that we can build in planters, rain gardens, curbside areas, stormwater wetlands. Can we just dig up the main street? Can we ban cars and put in a massive big stormwater wetland, taking up the whole of the 2 carriageways and some of the pavement on either side? So serious suggestions would also be tolerated. So getting from here to there, basically ensure that all new development that we look at actively benefits hydrodynamics, habitat, water quality and climate issues. Then we need to implement works to address the easy wins. So you've done 2 projects since last year, that's amazing. Now what we need is for Fingal, it's the Fingal area, is it? Yeah. For Fingal County Council to come in and say, okay, if the local community can do 2 with volunteer, backing, what we need to do is roll out 200 and really get behind this and move it forward. And there are probably 200 easy locations, and then we need to carry out a program of steady repair. We have screwed up so much. There is so much repair work that needs to be done, seriously. But it's not beyond the bounds of possibility. It's what we need to do in order to make it through the gap that we're looking at for the next 5 or 10 years. And so that is that. That's the slides. That gives you some idea of what's there as potentials. So if we gather and go for a walk, head around the village and meet up at the community centre. We'll be walking together, so don't all disperse. You're right, it's gone in and it's new, and that's quite normal for that to happen, to come up with a lovely plan. It was the same with the river. So Nave was wanting a re-wriggling, and then there were all sorts of footpaths put in that stopped the full extent of the re-wriggling. So that's quite normal, and I'd say at that point, you take a deep breath and you turn around and you say, okay, well, what can we still do? What's still there to deal with? And here, one of the things that we can do is take out a curb, drop it down, put our border around it with curbing, and just let this be our small little rain garden area. The other thing you could do is do the same here. This would be more expensive than in Ballinaham, but actually it mightn't, because the cost of the bricks that you'd sell might offset some of their capital costs. But similarly here, rather than having this raised up, If this was 6 inches below the ground around us, it'll be what's I can't remember the name. I think it might be called a bed or something. Where the trees that you plant, rather than planting beech trees which don't like moisture, if you plant a birch tree or an alder which do like moisture, then it can just let the water flow straight in. It's a small little area for it to gather, and then to catch the water from around the car park. I mean, you look at it, as you look at it intuitively, and you look at the car park design, you know, suddenly when you begin to think like a raindrop, where it lands and where it flows, you look and go, oh, that'd be really easy to have done differently. You know, and so I think it's a matter of just slowly, bit by bit, looking at other ways to approach the whole thing. There was a question about the sports ground and the sports ground being raised up. If you can manage to have no net movement of soil in or out of the site, so utilise some of the soil that's there, dig it out of one area to make a sunken area, and move it up onto another area to make that ground drier. From the water's point of view, it's got pretty much the same storage volume then afterwards. But what you're doing is you're dropping down an area that can become a community woodland or stormwater wetland or a habitat space or ponds or whatever it is. It makes it a lot cheaper because you're utilising the material that's on site already. And it means that you've got playing field areas then that are higher up, which is important in winter, you know. So it's providing that balance and approaching it sensibly.
If you dug out with a digger though, would you not be taking the topsoil off and hitting whatever is under
your
topsoil
subsoil
and
subsoil,
and
would that be unsuitable?
Well, yeah, would it have the same drainage?
Not necessarily. You might need to mix it through with, say, a wood chip mix. I mean, there are presumably lots of landscaping organisations in the area locally. If you were to mix through a lot of wood chips, that would hugely improve the carbon within the soil, which improves the drainage. It'll just provide physical bits, which improve the drainage as well. And it's also a waste product from the landscaping industry anyway. So just, I know that it's a readily reusable one anyway, but if you used that as a soil amendment there and really mixed it through whatever clay soil you had, you'd be incorporating that carbon in from the get-go and providing storage as well. So that's one way around that, because it's a good point.
Would leading water towards the pond that's already there be a good thing or a bad thing in terms of?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. On the one hand, if you can lead it through, it depends, I suppose. It depends on what happens to this water already. Given that it's a new drainage system, it's probably not going into the foul sewer. It's probably its own dedicated storm sewer. So it's probably running down along and straight into the stream itself, I would guess. I know that there's a couple of pipes just inside the stream there. And so it's bringing with it oil, microplastics, spilled milk, dog fouling, whatever it is. The more you can filter that water, the better. So say, for example, this area where we are now, if all of the grass in this teardrop area was dropped down a foot, and then route your storm sewers, actually, ideally what you would have done is design your car park so that all of the drainage was at surface level. That would be the idea. So you don't ever get into a drain to begin with. So you've got shallow surface level drains that pull your water down, preferably through planted channels, but even through little concrete conduits. But that would mean that by the time you get here, if you dropped this down 1.5 feet, this would be plenty low enough. Whereas as it is, our storm sewer drain pipe invert levels are already too low for that process. Now you could do it by intercepting the pipe and bringing it up again, so that your storm sewer pipe is always full, almost up to road level. And so this becomes a potential filter area, and then you can route this across and into the pipe pond. And that would provide your filtration.
And will this filtration area become eventually clogged with the contaminants that are in the water, or?
Probably not, simply because the car park is tarmac rather than gravel. Well, over the long term, yes. But in the short, like 20 years, it'll be fine, as long as you get down a good bit below your road level. So you've got that much to play with in that sense. The biggest risk, I suppose, is that as you block your storm sewer network, you need to have slightly more maintenance on the sewer network itself, with the storm sewers, flushing them through, because by blocking them, you don't have the natural flushing velocities to keep the grit being washed away into the river. Okay? Is the pond itself, and what can be done about the pond in terms of improving the quality, potentially reducing some of the bulrush cover, that kind of thing. So it's just an ongoing conversation that's being had in Skerries as well. And one of the main things to bear in mind is if you're removing plants from a pond, to limit it to about 1/3 of the area in any given year. Don't remove more than 1/3 in a given season, because otherwise you're removing too much habitat space. Okay.
Why would you remove? Why would you remove plant?
Well, further down you can see that it's after encroaching quite a lot, and it just means that what's happening at the moment is that there's a natural movement from pond to fen to bog. And at the moment, bulrush is an amazing fen building plant. It tends to grow out into the water, falls down, regrows again, and so as it does so, it'll cover the area of vegetation. That eventually fills in and becomes fen peat, and that eventually naturally becomes a raised bog. That's the natural movement. Or the scrub encroaches from the edge and it becomes a wet woodland and then woodland habitat. And so that's a natural process. But if you want to have a pond here for aesthetic reasons and for the habitat that ponds provide, then kind of stalling evolution is one of the potentials that can be embraced.
But with those rushes and things growing there now, can you be fairly confident that the water quality there is fairly okay, that they're doing it? No.
It's not.
No,
doesn't-
not
it
at all.
doesn't-
No, I'm sure it's not.
No.
No,
Okay.
not
So
at
they're
all.
not doing a lovely cleaning job.
Well, it's not that they're not doing a lovely cleaning job. They're working quite hard. One of the reasons why they're growing in such profusion is probably because I guess
so
that
many
there's high
nutrients there.
nitrates and phosphates.
Nutrients,
Exactly.
high nutrients.
And I would argue that, or I'd guess that probably a large factor is that the number of birds is kept artificially high. So if you feed birds on an ongoing basis, then you're feeding them artificially, they're pooping like mad into the water. The duck poo is very
Nutrients.
high in nitrogen and phosphorus, and thus you've got lots of nutrient growth. So the water doesn't look great. I don't know what the species of duckweed is on the surface. You don't know if it's
I don't know.
minor or minute.
You, Charlie?
No. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
I wouldn't
You
necessarily
wouldn't be
suggest that
jumping
it's
to
clean.
conclusions, no.
No, nor jumping into the pond. Shape, depth, flow patterns, and what I see here is quite a dead hydromorphology. There's not much going on. Ideally, what we'd be seeing is a tiny little channel with quite a brisk flow through it, even though it's quite level. And that flow will basically provide nice brisk flow, more oxygen introduction during the flow, but then during storm events, the water will rise up above the plants that are recreating that meandering and widen out into the wider channel so that it would avoid flooding. All of these plants will help to filter the water. So the one with the white flower is watercress, the slightly taller one there is fool's cress, and then you've got reed sweetgrasses and various things growing back up along, and they'll all provide a lot of filtration of the water. They'll filter out pathogens like the big COVID virus that you can see just there, which looks just like the illustrations, and basically filter the water of nutrients, suspended solids, and all that as it comes through. One of the challenges with these particular plants is that in a storm event they can become freed up from the base quite easily. There's a lot of top growth and relatively little root, and as they get washed down, they can actually catch on the barriers in some of the bridges and begin to clog up and form the potential for flooding, for backing up behind them. And the usual methodology is to go in and scratch out everything and throw it all away. And if instead we were to be really selective and just pull out the watercress and the fool's cress and leave those ones, which are much stronger rooted, if we left those in place, it would continue to provide filtration. It'll re-meander. You see the bit of a meander there. So there's a Leah had proposed re-meandering, which will be quite expensive for the park. But by simply leaving it evolve naturally, water wants to re-meander anyway, and so it's doing that there. But I would say pulling out some of these on an occasional basis is probably useful. But again, ideally not more than 1/3 of the total cover any given year. Some pear grasses at the side. I love the ferns actually, and the ivy leaf toadflax growing in the wall. I think they're beautiful. Beyond that, again, it's all at one side. If I was to go playing, what I'd do is I'd take out a clump from the right and I'd put it somewhere on the left, just to try to get to re-wriggle it. And that's a really, really cheap, easy process, you know. Other than that, I don't see a massive amount. The water looks a little bit clearer here, you know, and nice. Still some fines at the base. Okay, so here we could do a number of things. I mean, a raised planter is one obvious one. So given that there's a gully here as well, it's obviously water settling. So by dropping this area down a bit, that'll be another way to approach it. Have a, front garden type thing, but within the gutters and easy. So here, and again as we walk around the streets, you can see with every gully downpipe, there's the space for a filter system of some sort. And I would say that there shouldn't be a drop of rainfall that should land on a street and make its way to the river without having passed through plants and microbes and soil and have that potential to soak into the ground and to be filtered. You know, we need to look at every opportunity that we have, and starting with the really easy ones, but then moving steadily to everything else that we can see. Maybe, I'm guessing 2 to 3 foot, rake it over with the base, and then plant it, break it up again, so you've got a lovely tall, statuesque bulrush planting right in the middle of the street. And actually, while you're on, the services pipes there or wiring, so we just need to be careful of ESB or gas or whatever it is. But you know, as you say, you know, whenever there's an opportunity like that to convert it to something positive, would be good. From a tidy town's point of view, if you've got the opportunity to put in planted features, if you can manage to drop the curb as well and make them into a planted feature that also doubles as habitat, also doubles as water storage and water soakage, that can all add benefit and benefit and benefit. There's in permaculture, Bill Mollison has a wonderful phrase, we are surrounded by insurmountable opportunities. You know, so we just need to grasp those and run with them. You know, and the permaculture principle of stacking, so lots of different functions in a given area is another thing that we can embrace. All of that turning, drop the ground level down here, maybe 6 inches below road level, dig it over, so we make a planted area there, so the water flowing down along the road naturally just soaks straight in here. At a certain stage it'll just fill it up and it'll flow back onto the road. But for those intermediate scale showers, it'll flow down, flow into that area, stay there, and soak into the ground gradually. So as it flows, so I don't know. I've actually, you've sent me on maps, you were there on it and stuff in detail as well. I just don't think they exist on my computer, which I apologise for. But for here, what you can do here is maybe widen it out by a foot, you know, very, very little, and just have a run of yellow flag iris planted all the way down it. You know, yellow flag iris and watermint. So you've got an open swale that catches the water just as effectively as it did before, if not more so, and just catches the water from the streets as it's moving back down along towards the nearest curve. And here again, any opportunity to services pipes everywhere, adopting and stuff. So it might be tricky, but even something small will, you know, it'll all be better. Yeah. So you can see that the moss is beginning to grow, and the more we can just let the moss grow, the more it will hold rainfall. So just slow down the runoff just marginally. Every house has that.
My garden shed, half my garden shed.
Exactly. That's it. Exactly.
I love the colour.
Gorgeous. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so what we could do is dig out, I mean, you need to be careful with the foundations, but basically dig out a foot and a half, and run your line of bulrushes and yellow flag iris right along the road. You know, so you're just digging down, building up your area in yellow flag iris and the like, and again, just providing a space for the water to soak into.
Dig down a bit further and then leave
There
it
you
a
are.
while.
If that's flooding, then rather than the water, because as I look at it just visually, the tarmac looks like the lowest area at the moment. So if you were to drop this down 6 inches lower than the tarmac, it just means that it's got somewhere to go to. Now, I don't know if this would just fill up with water straight away or not, but it'd be worth a try, and it would mean that you could pay tenants for, you know, 5% longer, or 10% longer, or 50% longer, depending on how much water it would store.
Yeah.
Amazing, lovely, really nice. So what we'll do is, presumably you're going to pull the gutter out, straight into it, and then potentially put a water bucket inside as well if you want to. Or you've got those
The water
as well.
on the other downpipe, because we wanted one right at the top where there's more people passing,
Right.
more visibility.
Yeah, fair enough, lovely.
Potentially.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. And you said there was tarpaulin
So
question?
there's,
Is that a
there's
thing?
tarpaulin in the bottom few inches rather
Okay.
than all the way up the sides, which would have been preferable.
Yeah.
But
I don't know how much of a difference it makes actually, because you mainly want to protect the base.
Yeah.
What I had on the sides of mine was impermeable plastic going up the
Yeah.
sides, so that would have stopped the moisture.
yeah.
And I suppose the tarpaulin would probably have created slightly more of a gap for moisture to keep the moisture away from it. But it's certainly not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Having it across the base and up a
That's the
little bit.
main
That's
basic
the main thing.
Yeah.
To protect, there's gravel in the base, is there?
Yeah.
And so what the tarp does is prevents the soil from mixing with the gravel, and it does that really well. And then the timber then will either, whether if it's been treated, it'll last longer. If it hasn't been treated, it'll decay more quickly. But no, I think it looks great. It's lovely.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. And have you a pipe coming out the side then, or does it just soak down
That's going to
through?
go. That will go in when
Okay.
we've got the connector from the down pipe.
Okay.
And that's the last bit
Cool.
to do.
Good
So
stuff.
the hose
And
pipe.
do you have a pipe underneath?
We've got hose pipe with the holes in.
Oh, okay. Cool. Following the
release it
guidance stuff
slowly.
from South Dublin.
That is very much the plan that we were
Guiding
following. Yeah.
principle.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Lovely. That's all.
Yeah, and then we've got a water butt on the next
Okay.
down pipe up here.
Brilliant. During dry weather, which is fine. Because it's just letting the water out. Cool.
We filled that with water just for the day, isn't that right, Helen? I saw you with a big watering
It was
can.
filled up with water about 10 minutes after they plugged it all in because the heavens
From the
opened.
rain.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
it rains and we were good to
That's
go.
how it's good. So you've got your water diverter here.
Yeah.
And typically, let me see. I wonder. Oh, this is sealed at the top. If for a tank that's sealed at the top, this design I think is probably fine. If your tank is open at the top, this diverter actually needs to be level with the top of the pipe, at the top of the tank, or a little bit below it, so that when the water comes down, it fills up the tank, preferentially, but when the tank is full, this then overflows back down into the gutter. Because this is a sealed tank, it's absolutely fine, but if it was open, as I say, this design would mean that the tank would overflow, and this would cease to come into effect unless there's very heavy rainfall that actually bypasses this completely. And do you guys know what the inside of the gutter here looks like now?
I do know what the fitting looks.
Yeah, the fitting had a filter in it. So
Okay, cool. So you roll it in and it opens up or something?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Because the ones that I've seen are like a half tire. So you actually cut the gutter, fit the unit into it, and so the water sticking to the inside of the pipe gets caught in the half tire and goes out. And then the remainder in heavy rainfall, or if it gets black with leaves, it just carries straight on down along the pipe. And the leaves generally go down the middle.
I'm a little worried about that.
So
Community centre, it'll be a very easy space just to drop the ground level down and create a rain garden in this area, either taking out that one curb space, that one parking space, or just removing this triangle here, depending on how much space you can free up. The falls seem to be away in that direction a bit, so I'm not sure that we'd get a massive catchment in this location. We might be better off moving our attentions to somewhere slightly lower down and make it slightly bigger. But I would say, given that this is already in existence, we'd take some of that space and could potentially lay a very, very low concrete ramp, just literally an inch high, so that when the water falls there, it's pulled back in this direction, just to protect the lower area from flooding even more.